In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to create a 3D parallaxing background, all inside Moho. If you want to get the downloadable files for this tutorial, each Tuesday I send out a newsletter straight to your email with exclusive Moho offers, news, free project downloads, character downloads, rigging guides, and a whole lot more. Consider subscribing to the Moho Studio Academy newsletter. Links in the description. Let's get started. Let's go ahead and set up our setting, which will be this desert landscape that you see here. So I'm going to cover how to create your background, setting up your background. I'm going to talk about styles, gradients, and even Z positioning. So I drew up this desert directly in Moho, but you can easily create your assets in Photoshop or whatever your favorite drawing program is, and then import them into Moho. So here we have a pretty simple example of a desert landscape, complete with a midground, which is this area right here, this orange, and our background. If we go into the file folders here, you can see that this is the background that's separating that midground there, that front part. We also got some clouds, just 2 clouds, and we also have our sky in the background. And you're going to notice as I move my camera around that the midground and the background are all moving at different rates. And this is what's known as parallaxing. And we're going to do this by setting up all of our layers inside of a Z axis. And I'll talk about that more. So let's go ahead and get started with drawing our assets. So before I even created the background that you just saw, this is all I had to begin with. I just had my character who is already fully animated, who is standing on top of this background, or this midground, that you can see here, and the character then jumps across. But now, as you saw there, when it got to this part where the camera then zooms out, you can see that even though on frame 0, I created a little bit of overlap on this midground here, past what we call the shot. This is going to be our shot here, the part that you only see in the camera and your export animation. It all looks like it's all there. But as soon as I move my camera out, as soon as I zoom out, you can see that it's cut off. So that is one really important thing to keep in mind when you're creating your backgrounds, is just like in this example here, is to always create some overlap. A good rule of thumb is to at least create 2 to 3 times past your shot, just in case you want to do any more zooming out or moving of your camera. So let's go ahead and let's draw out our midground here 2 to 3 times larger than our shot here. So what I'm going to do is first hide the Spacewoman character. We're not going to do anything with any animation. We're just going to be working and drawing on our background. And then I'm going to come here to the settings folder. I'm going to drop that down and I'm going to select the midground folder, which as you can see here, it's inside of a folder and it has a shadow and it has the ground. This is a masking folder, and what we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving what's inside of that masking folder, which is the ground, which is this right here. So using G on my keyboard, I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to hit T on the keyboard, and with my arrows there, you can see there it has a little crosshair. I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm going to drag that out. So again, about 2 to 3 times, and I'm also going to do the same thing as far as 2 to 3 times past going down. There's not going to be a lot going on below it, but just in case, I can go ahead and I can move this down a little bit as well, in case there's going to be a slight camera zoom out where it would be needed. So I'm using keyboard shortcuts to quickly select my different layers here. I want you to get in the habit of doing that as well. So Alt right click to quickly select your layers. You can see here as I'm Alt right clicking, it's changing between the 2 layers. So we got our shadow and our ground. So this is the shadow. Again, I'm going to go back to the ground layer and I'm going to hold T, Shift, and I'm going to drag that out to about there. Alt right click, hit G, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to drag that down roughly to where it was before. And then I'm going to Alt right click, grab the shadow, and just drag the shadow down. So again, I know that I'm not going to be doing anything with these cliffs past this certain point right here. But again, this is just in case I do need to zoom it a little bit out, it's not cut off. All right, so let's go ahead and switch back over to the completed file. As you can see here, I have this huge sky layer. It's probably a little bit bigger than it needs to be. I could probably shrink that down. It doesn't really matter. Because what I did is I made this sky immune to camera movements. When I'm moving my camera around, I don't want my sky to be moving around. You can see that the gradient and everything, it's all staying in place. So what I want to do is I'm going to go down to layer 4, and I believe it's labeled already in the other one. Yeah, so this is sky, but this is the sky here in this file. So if I double click it, you can see that the camera is immune. It's immune to camera movements, meaning it's not going to move around. So I'm going to go to the staging.moho file, the one that you should have open. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select that layer. All of these layers are currently empty. They're just organized so it's easy as possible for you just to select a layer and create. So it's all organized as far as the order, the layer order of where everything needs to be. So select the sky layer, go to your shape tool, and make sure that you have the rectangle selected here. I'm just going to have my autofill on. Now, before I create my shape, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create my style. So this is my palette tool, which we're going to talk about now. So I'm going to select my style panel, and I'm coming here to the style palette that I have going on. So this top row right here is the sky. This is the clouds. This is the background 3, 2, and 1. And that's going in order as far as this 1, 2, 3, as far as the backgrounds, and then the sky. And then here's the clouds. So the first thing I'm going to do for the sky is I'm going to select this effect panel right here and click the drop down, select gradient. Now it's going to give me 3 little color boxes, and each of these color boxes is representing the gradient that is changing. I can slide these around. I can create more simply by clicking in an empty space. I can select a box and I can delete it so I don't have too many colors. And right here in this example, we want 4 colors. So I'm going to have my type as linear. You can set it to radial or anything else. But in this case, for a horizon, it makes the most sense to set it to linear. So I'm going to first select this first color box and use my color picker, select that first color. Now I know that there's 4 colors, so let's go ahead and let's make another one. And now it's going to automatically select that color. You can go in and change it here if you want, but if you want to use this palette, you can use these colors. So I'm going to go ahead and select it. Select the next box, select the color, select the next box, and select the color. So now we have our sky right here. Now I want to take a little bit of the purple out, so I'm going to go ahead and raise that up a little bit, make it a little bit more wider, and that looks pretty good. Now this is fully adjustable. You can come back and adjust this at any time, but we can also adjust it outside of this, and I'll show you how. So I'm going to hit OK. So now what we have is we have a style gradient created. So now when I go and I create this shape, I'm going to go ahead and click and drag out this shape. You can see that when I was first dragging, it's creating this ugly orange right here because that's the base color. But what's being overridden, and I'll go ahead and show you. So now it's red, but it's being overridden with the effects panel for this gradient. So now as you can see here, I have my sky, but it doesn't quite match up with this other sky. So how do I fix that? What I'm going to do is with that layer selected, I'm going to hit Q on my keyboard. You'll see a little symbol that lets me know that I have a gradient on this layer. So this little symbol right here, the solid side, lets me drag up and down, whereas this one lets me shrink my gradient down, stretch it out, move it around, whatever you want to do. Now, because I want to create a sky, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit Control J on my keyboard to create my output. And then I'm going to take and I'm going to drag this down to where I got some purples and I got some oranges, and it looks pretty good there. So right about there looks pretty good as a sky. And that's it. That's all we're going to do for this tutorial. So now we have our sky set up. One last thing that we need to do is make sure to double click that layer and make sure it's immune to camera. If it's not, you can turn that off and on at any time. But yeah, go ahead, make sure your sky looks as good as you want it. All right, so now we are ready to create our background. So we got our sky. We don't have our clouds yet. We're not going to worry about that yet. But what we're going to do is we're going to start creating these backgrounds. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to create this first background here. So let's go ahead and let's hide the other two. So this is the result that you should have by the end of this video. So what I did with these backgrounds, I had the first layer of backgrounds closest to the camera, the darkest. And then as I got further away from the camera, you can see it gets a little bit lighter. And then I wanted the very background just to kind of be the background. I didn't want it to distract the viewer. They can see clearly what it is that is in the distance there. But other than that, I really didn't want, I want the character to be the main focus more than anything. So let's go ahead and let's create this first background. So I'm going to go back into the staging.moho file. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the background 1. So again, it's under the background folder. It's going to be background 1. And what we're going to do first is we're going to create our base. This is just a folder right now, but what we're going to do is we're going to create it as a masking folder so that we have this highlight here and then we have this base. But this base is going to require 2 different colors. It's going to require the darkest color and a light color. Because what I have on this base, it's kind of hard to see, but there's a gradient. As it's going up, it's going lighter. So it's darker down here and it's going lighter as it's going towards the top. Now, if I click on these little ellipses right here, it's going to let me pull up my gradient. And now this is where it might get a little confusing. Right now you can see that I have the sky, but if I go in here and I change any of these colors, you can see it's not going to make a difference to the actual sky here. And that's because I don't have the layer selected, nor do I have the shape selected. All it's doing now is it's now taking the information that I'm inputting now, and whatever shape I create next, it's going to create that style. So as you change this, make sure that you're not on your sky layer and selecting that shape. So we're going to create a new shape. So right now we're on base. So we're on a new layer. And what I want to do first is I'm going to take out one of these colors because I only need 2. I just need a light and a dark. So I'm going to select this color first, which is going to be my light color. And I'm going to select the light color here, the lighter color of the 2. They're both very dark. And then this one right here. So now you can see this is what the result of what you should have. And again, you don't have to do exactly everything that I'm doing. You can do everything your own way as far as the colors and styles that you want to create. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to come out here, again, 2 to 3 times past this overall shot right here. So 2 to 3 times past that, I'm going to start creating my mountains. So with my add point tool, A on the keyboard, I'm going to start creating my mountain shapes. And you can see that as I was creating those mountain shapes, the camera, this whole thing right here is flickering. Don't worry about that. That's just something that happens with within Moho. I don't know why. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit G on my keyboard, and I'm going to select these 2 points down here. And again, I'm going to drag them down with my T on the keyboard, drag those points down to about there. Okay. And then if I wanted to, I can make this a little bit wider. So I'm going to hold down Alt and just drag on the sides there, and that looks a little bit better. Okay, so now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select between the 2 peaks. I'm going to select all of these by hitting G and holding down Shift as I'm making my selection. I'm going to hit C on the keyboard for my curvature tool, and I'm going to smooth these out. So now I can kind of get a different shape in there so it doesn't all look like just triangles. Now, if you wanted to, you can smooth the top of these out if you wanted to do something like smoothed hills or something like that. But I'm trying to go for kind of a sand dune type of look here. So really quick, I'm just going to add some points. Okay, so now we kind of got our first set there. Now again, what I can do is I can drag this down if it's too high up, because again, this is kind of the result that we're wanting to get is we don't want it to take up the whole shot because we want to show the rest of our background and we want to show what's behind it. So I'm just going to drag this down just a tiny bit more. And actually, you know what? That's pretty good right there. So now this is what I have. So now let's hit Q on the keyboard and let's select our shape. And there we have our little gradient icon there showing that we have gradient. You can see as I drag this around that the darker, I want it to be at the bottom. So I'm going to pull that towards the bottom of this, what's visible here. So I'm going to zoom in on this because right now that gradient is doing absolutely nothing. And I can see the darkness there. So I can pull that in a lot closer. I just want to create some really strong contrast with this foreground and with the character. I really don't want anything to blend together. So that looks pretty good for now. Now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create the highlight for this background one. Or in this case, it's going to be kind of like the lighting from this sky. So I'm going to create the highlight on these little sand dunes. So I'm going to select the highlight layer. And now I'm not going to do anything with the gradient. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here to the gradient and I'm going to select plane. So now it's not going to have any gradient whatsoever. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come here to my style and I'm going to select this style right here. So I'm just going to be doing a fill for this highlight. So what I'm going to do is select the fill, select my color picker tool, and then select the highlight there. Hit OK. And same thing with my add points tool. I'm going to go ahead and hide my midground so I can see what's going on. With my add points tool, what I'm going to do is start creating some shapes. And let's see if we can get this to work. There we go. So hit A on the keyboard, and I'm going to start creating my shapes. I'm going to hide my sky because my sky keeps on blurring out everything else. And I'm just going to follow the contour of these hills that we're creating here. Now, as I connect the shape, okay, so when I connected the shape, it actually defaulted back to my regular gradient, which I don't want. So in this case, I'm not really sure what happened, but I'm going to go to my gradient once again, and I'm going to hit plane. So now this has no gradient. It just has my highlight that I selected. I'm going to come here to the next one and go to the very bottom of the base. And again, just create this shape. I want to come to the top of these cliffs here. And let's go ahead and let's turn our masking on so you can see exactly what I'm doing. So I'm going to go to the background one, double click, hit masking, hide all, apply. And so now you can see kind of what's going on. So now I can come in here and I can refine this a little bit more, making sure that these lights actually follow the cliffs of the shape of these cliffs so that you can see kind of how the light is going to be bouncing off of these cliffs. Okay, and now this part I just want to mention really quick here. So here in my shot, I have everything that I need. Let's go ahead and render that out. So here in the shot, I basically have highlighted what's showing. But what I can do is, again, just keep it in mind that you might be moving your camera out a little bit further than expected sometimes. I'm going to go ahead to these last two shapes on both sides here, and I'm going to create a highlight for those as well. All right, awesome. And then if I go ahead and I render this, this is the result that I have for mine. Again, you can make these any shape you want. Again, I was kind of looking for like a sand dune type of look here with like kind of like the morning light reflecting, or I guess it could be sunset, either way. All right, so now we're going to create our next set of backgrounds here, the second one and then the third one. So let's go ahead and let's create our background two. Now I want this to contrast a little bit with the front background here. So I'm going to be drawing kind of mountains, plateaus, just different type of shapes here in between all of these shapes. So you can kind of see the two different backgrounds together there. Again, I'm going to bring it down to right about there. And notice I'm going pretty fast with this. I'm going to hit T on the keyboard, connect those together. By default, we forgot to set up our style. So by default, it's going to create the exact same gradient, but that can quickly be fixed because, again, we don't want to have a gradient for this next set of background that we just created for our background too. So I'm going to select that shape. I'm going to go ahead, and again, I don't know why it keeps on creating a gradient, but I'm just going to hit none. And I want to have the background a different color than our highlight. So I'm going to hit Q on the keyboard, and with that background 2 selected, I'm going to come here with the color picker tool for my fill, and I'm going to select that second fill background there, which is that one that you see there. So now when I go ahead and I render this, you can see the background. And again, I'm not going to have this one as pointy, so I can kind of round these out a little bit more, still give them a little bit of shape as far as like a sand dune type of fill. So go ahead and create that background 2 the way that you want it. And then once you're ready, we'll go ahead with the background 3. So the background 3, I wanted to do kind of like a cool, just really simple though, as you can see there. If you see the movie Cars and all the different shapes, I believe they based that off of a lot of the mountain shapes and things like that in Utah. And I think that looks really cool. So we'll get some pretty unique shapes in there. Really not based off of anything in reality, but just something that looks kind of alienish in a way. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, in this case, I have 2 colors. This is another gradient. So I'm going to, with my background 3 selected, go to my dropdown, gradient, and I only want 2 colors. You can see it's doing by default that 3 color thing. I just want 2 colors. So I'm going to select this middle one. I'm going to delete it. I'm going to select this color, and this could be my highlight. And this is going to be the darker color of the two. There we go. All right, so now when I create the shape, and let's go ahead and let's figure out what kind of shape we're going to create here. I think we can do some pretty fun stuff. Okay, so now this is what we got here. Let's go ahead and let's grab the actual shape. So Q on the keyboard, grab the shape, and let's figure out where our gradient is. Okay, so it's wanting to go darker from the top, which I don't want. I want to go darker from the bottom, lighter towards the top, because we got the sun there kind of helping out. All right, so let's make sure. Now I don't want to go too dark. I might even need to probably pick a different type of color, because if I bring this gradient too high up, you can see it's now taking out this color here. So I want that lighter color to be really prominent. Yeah, that looks okay. So if I go ahead and I play that out, so I think that looks pretty good. Again, you might be looking at that and you're like, oh, what is that? So again, you can use the excuse as an alien planet. But again, they have these in Utah, these little spire things. I just can't do it justice in this quick video here. So that looks pretty good. So now let's bring back our sky. So now you should have your sky and you should have your background. All right, so now let's go ahead and create our clouds. Just like everything else in these videos, you can do this however you want as far as the design, your style, whatever you want to do. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to select one of the cloud layers. You can select either one, and I'm going to hit clouds 2. I'm going to go over again to my style. I'm going to go to my style panel. I am going to select the gradient that I want to use. I'm going to delete the additional color there. Select the white, color picker, select the black, and use the color picker. So now I have the two different colors there for my cloud. So with my add points tool, this is how I create clouds. Again, you can create them however you want. I'm going to go ahead and holding down shift, and I'm just going to draw a straight line with my add points tool. And then I'm going to create my cloud. Okay. Again, the background's kind of flashing there. It's a little annoying, I know. So again, you can turn that off if that gets in the way. All right, so now I have my cloud, and basically all I do from here is I just grab the tips. It's really as easy as that. And I go to my curvature tool, and I put smooth on. And that's not really the type of style that I use, so I'm going to just kind of move this to what looks like something I would draw. And I think something close to that looks pretty good. And we'll do the exact same thing. So we'll do clouds 2. So again, you can have as many clouds as you want. If it's easier for you, you can duplicate this layer and then redraw it. Let me go ahead and just render this. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then I'm just going to go ahead and create another. Basically, that is it as far as the clouds go. Let's go into our gradients and just make sure we got our gradient set up right. So in this one, what I want to do is I'm going to have the top of the cloud a little bit darker. Let me turn my sky back on. So I'm going to have the top of the cloud a little bit darker and the bottom a little bit lighter. So just kind of like how you see there. Probably not that dark, so I'm going to pull that gradient out just a little bit, just position it further down, pull it out so that gradient stretches along better. Looks pretty good. Same thing, I'm going to go to the other side, pull that gradient down, pull it up, pull it down, and just kind of adjust it to what looks good. And there we go. So there you have your desert landscape. The only other thing that I would suggest is maybe these points right here, probably not make them so straight. Probably get a little bit of a curve. Okay. And overall, I think that looks pretty good. So now we're basically ready to set up our scene in the Z axis. So that's how we get that 3D look. So now let's go ahead and let's create this 3D effect like we have here. So if I go back to the file that we were working with and I move my camera, you can see everything is moving at the exact same rate, at the exact same speed. It's not moving like it is here. It's not parallaxing. So let's see why that is. If I go here to my workspace tool, this orbit tool, and I click on it and I drag to the left, you're going to see my whole scene that I just created. Here's my color palette. Let's actually go ahead and let's hide that. So here we have the clouds and we have the background, the foreground, and everything is flat. But we're now in this 3D view. This little icon right here, this represents our camera. This arrow is representing the front of the camera. So the camera is pointed, like as if we move right here, the camera is pointed at the character and at this scene. So when I render that camera out, it's showing me exactly what the camera sees. But as you can see there, all of these layers, they're on the exact same value on this z-axis. So again, y we already know is up and down, x is left to right, but the z-axis is the depth. So in order to create that 3D effect, what we would need to do is take these layers and place them further away from one another and further away from the camera in order to create that effect. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to keep the midground and the character exactly the same. In fact, if I wanted to, I can come in here and I can play out the animation, and you can even see, even though I'm in this 3D view, the animation is still playing out and it's still 2D. But the animation that I want to get is her running across the screen. So let's try to figure out, okay, how far away are these dunes from the actual character? So I'm going to come here to that first background 1 layer. And if I come up to my layer transform tool, you can see that it brings up my values. So I can see where it is on the x-axis, and I can also see where it is on the y-axis. But now we see that the value is the exact same value as the midground and as the character, which is 0. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to show you an example. I'm going to split this view into 2 separate views. So I'm going to have one as the front view and one as the 3D view. So let's go ahead and let's click on this one and rotate it in 3D. You don't need to do this. I just want to show you how this works in 3D. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this front layer, like I said, and I'm going to push it back in the Z space. And let's just go ahead and do that with the values here. So I know with this one, I want to push it back to -6 as my value. But now look what happened. As I pushed that back, it pushed back properly, but now I can see this bottom coming up. The whole part of it had shrunk. But let's say I want to maintain the visual size. Well, what I need to do is exactly what it says here. I'm going to hold Shift plus Alt to move in Z to maintain visual size. So now watch what happens here as I'm moving this layer back here. All right, so now holding down Shift and Alt, I'm going to push this back in Z space. So right here, the value is at 0. But as I hold down Shift, Alt, and I click and I drag backwards, you can see that each time as I let go of my mouse after dragging and then letting go, it's snapping back to maintain its visual size. So I'm going to keep on doing that until I hit -6. So I'm going to keep pulling that back. So we're at -5. There we go, -6. I'm going to pull it forward a little bit. And you can see, if I come here, that it's just getting bigger and bigger as it gets further and further away from the camera in order to maintain its visual size. Pretty cool, huh? So again, I'm going to go back to that layer, back to the background 1. Actually, let's go to background 2. So background 2, if I click on that, I can see it's at 0. Again, I want to set it to -10, but watch what happens when I do. It just becomes a little itty bitty thing. It displays properly in the Z space, but now the visual size of what we originally created is now really, really off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hold down Alt and Shift, and I'm going to push that back. You can see right here, it's getting pushed back. So we're at -6. Let's keep pushing that back. -11. Let's bring it forward a little bit because we want to be at around -10 is pretty good. All right, now that looks pretty good right there. And now let's go ahead and do the same thing to the very last part of the background there, which is BG3. And I'm going to click on that. And again, I'm going to push it all the way. Now this one is going to be a little bit different and a little bit tricky because now we're going really, really far away. So we're going to go to -64. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag to about right there. Let's see where that leaves it. Okay, so that's -71. Let's go ahead and let's drag it back a little bit closer. 69. It looks like it's struggling to drag it back towards the camera. So we're just going to kind of have to inch it. There we go. So we're around -64 right there. And the last thing that we're going to do is the clouds. So the clouds, I want them to be somewhere around here and here. So I'm going to guess around a value of around -30. So I'm going to select the clouds layer, hit M on my keyboard. And again, we're at 0. Let's go ahead and push that back to -30. So Thinking about the Z space, okay, about there looks about right. Okay, we need to go back a little bit further. Let's go ahead and, why does it keep doing that? Let's go ahead and pull that back. All right, so something I found out as I was trying to push these clouds back, if you push it closer to the bottom of the layer, it's gonna push back a lot more easier than it would if you're trying to do it from the top. There tends to be a lot more snapping. So I'm gonna push it back. There we go. So we're at -19. And again, I said I wanted to do around -30. All right, now looks pretty good. So now if we go back to here and we take a look, we can kind of see more or less where these clouds are at. Again, the 3D aspect of it isn't the greatest. So let me go ahead and rotate this. So you can kind of see where the clouds are at. But let's go ahead to test this. Let's go back to our reset view and let's go ahead and use our camera pan tool to pan around and see how everything's moving. And there you go. Everything's moving pretty dang good there. We can bring back in our sky. So we have all of this parallaxing effect now going on. The clouds themselves, they are moving pretty quick back and forth, more so than I'd want because they're clouds. So they should actually be pretty far, actually a lot more further than that mountain there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the cloud layer and I'm going to push it back to about 100 and I'll just manually type it in. And then to compensate for how far I just pushed it back, I'm going to increase the layer size back to its original shape. So somewhere to about there looks pretty good. So as you can see now, as I move this around, the clouds now aren't moving as much as they were before. So that's it. We created our background. It's all set up in the Z axis. Our animation is basically ready to go. So then that leaves us with the camera in angle position to wrap up the principle of animation for staging. I'll see you later.